The Chinese violated those agreements. Now, the state of the border will determine the state of the relationship. In this world, no country, not even the United States today, has the ability to address big global challenges all on their own. This is a 21st century way of responding to a more diversified, dispersed world.
Minister Jaishankar, if it's all right, I'll begin with you. We just heard about how France and Europe in general are contributing to Indo Pacific security. But since we are in Europe, I'd like to ask you how India is contributing to European security. India has spoken out vociferously against China for its actions on the disputed border between India and China. But India, however, has abstained from voting on Ukraine in the UN Security Council. Could you please help me understand if India's position is that different principles should apply in different parts of the world?
Well, I don't think the situations in the Indo Pacific and the transatlantic are really analogous. And certainly, the assumption in your question that somehow there's a trade-off and one country does this in the Pacific, so in return you do something else. I don't think that's the way international relations work. We have, I think, quite distinct challenges. What's happening here, what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. In fact, if there was a connection by that logic, you would have had a lot of European powers very early taking very sharp positions in the Indo-Pacific, and we didn't see that. We haven't seen that since 2009. So now, yes, there is now, from last year, a EU strategy. What you spoke about in your remarks, France, Germany, Netherlands, these are all very recent developments. And the problem in Indo-Pacific is not recent. So I would say you really need to look at that question again.
So you disagree that principles, the international rules-based order, international law, you disagree that that should apply across the world uniformly?
No, I think I would say principles and interests are balanced. And if people were so principled in this part of the world, they would have been practicing the principles in Asia or in Afghanistan before we've actually seen them do.
Let's move on to the next question to you. And moving away from Europe now, India's relations with China took a sharp downturn in, I think it was around June 2020, given the Ladakh crisis on your border. What has the crisis meant for India's China strategy? And has it meant a decisive and enduring shift towards the West?
It has, look, it's a problem we are having with China. And the problem is this, that for 45 years, there was peace, there was stable border management. There were no military casualties on the border from 1975. That changed because we had agreements with China not to bring military forces to we call it border, but it's line of actual control. And the Chinese violated those agreements. Now, the state of the border will determine the state of the relationship. That's natural. So obviously, relations with China right now are going through a very difficult phase. But I would quite honestly again question your question that therefore our relations with the West are better. My relations with the West were quite decent before June 2020. So again, I would challenge that correlation that you're making.
Perhaps just one more question on India and Southeast Asia. Prime Minister Modi has look enact East policy. He's sought to focus more in Southeast Asia. However, a recent poll, in fact, I think it was published just last week, indicates that on this occasion of the 30th anniversary of ASEAN-India relations, which we celebrate this year, at this time, levels of trust between Southeast Asian countries and India are fairly low. India ranks fifth after Japan, the United States, the EU, China, and only 16.6% of respondents in this poll have said that they have confidence in India. What do you think India can do better to leverage its great soft power in the region?
I'm a politician, so I believe in polls, but I've never seen a poll which has made any sense to me when it comes to foreign policy. So I guess the one you cited probably is part of a long list there. But I would say that our relations right now with ASEAN are actually growing well. I mean, if I were to actually look at the evolution, the two big changes which are taking place, we have much stronger security cooperation with ASEAN. I've just come from a trip to the Philippines, where we've actually signed agreements for military supplies to the Philippines. We are part of ADMM Plus. We have strong bilateral relations with Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam, amongst others. And the other is physical connectivity. So I hate to challenge you for the fourth time, but I don't think that poll's very good.
It's good to still be considered as young and be back here in Munich. The first informal meeting of Quad, I think, was in Manila, and it was a decade later that the leaders of Quad actually, again in Manila, came to meet each other. Recently, we had a presidential debate in the Philippines, and it seems even our presidential candidates don't know what is the Quad all about. Can you tell us about Quad? What is it? Is it the Asian NATO? Is it a NATO with Asian characteristic? Is it just an ad hoc body? And to what degree does the evolution of Quad, maybe in the next 10 years, tethered to behavior of China? And by that matter, also calculus of India, because we have 3 treaty allies here. India is not. So I think, to what degree does China and India's calculus play into the trajectory of Quad in the next decade or so? Thank you very much.
I assume that's at me, right? Look, you know, the first time the Quad countries came together was actually in 2004. In response to the Boxing Day tsunami. And I had an association with it. I was the country coordinator, in a sense, for India for that response. Then their representatives met in 2007, as you said, in Manila. But the countries were not sufficiently invested in it politically, so they kind of let it fritter away. And then they met again a decade later. In 2017, in September, this time at a higher level of a sort of permanent secretary, vice minister sort of level. 2019, it became ministers, which was when we first met. And 2021, it's become a summit. Now, what is the Quad about? You know, it's in a sense natural, because partly you're sitting in Europe, but also because all of us pull out concepts from pre-existing lexicon to say it's an Asian NATO, because it's a very convenient, if completely misleading term, but it's still very convenient. And of course, there are interested parties who advance that kind of analogy. I would put it to you as 4 countries who have common interests, common values, a great deal of comfort. Now, obviously, if there are challenges to global norms, global order, to international law, to rules-based order, it makes sense that, you know, anybody who's working for the good will also look at challenges to the good. So I would urge you not to slip into that, I mean, forgive my saying so, that lazy analogy of an ASEAN NATO. It isn't, because there are 3 countries who are treaty allies. We're not a treaty ally. Quad doesn't have a treaty, it doesn't have a structure, it doesn't have a secretariat. It's a kind of this is a 21st century way of responding to a more diversified, dispersed world. Sorry for a long answer, but I thought it's a good explanation. You know, in 2016, we were, I think, among the first, or probably the first country who actually laid out in detail our connectivity policy. And we did so because we could see there was a building debate about strategic connectivity, how to use connectivity for strategic purposes. Essentially what we suggested was that connectivity should be transparent, it should be commercially based, it should have local buy-ins, it should not create debt, it should be environmentally and ecologically friendly, it should not be unilateral, and it should not violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries. It should not be built unilaterally by other countries. There are competitive offers for development projects. Why should countries not take advantage of it? I mean, if I could rephrase it in a way. Look, it's international relations is competitive. Every country will look for opportunities and see what it can do. But while doing so, it's in their own interest to be prudent about what they're getting into, to do the due diligence. We have seen now countries, including in our region, being saddled with large debts. We have seen projects which are commercially unsustainable, airports where an aircraft doesn't come, harbors where a ship doesn't come. I think people would be justified in asking themselves, what am I getting into? It's obviously in the interest of the country concerned, but it's also in the interest of the international community, because unsustainable projects don't end there. They then often the next is debt becomes equity, and that becomes something else.